The show had been running for 20 minutes. Normal pace. Normal energy. The kind of episode that starts with a family dispute, moves through some tears, lands on practical advice, wraps up with a plan. Dr. Phil had done thousands of them. He knew the rhythm by feel. When to push, when to ease back, when to let the silence breathe. He was good at this. One of the best who'd ever done it. But nothing in 30 years of doing this had prepared him for what an elderly woman named Dorothy pulled out of her canvas bag at minute 23. The studio had gone from warm to frozen in the span of 3 seconds. Not because of something said. Because of something shown. A piece of paper. Small. Yellowed. Folded so many times the creases had become tears held together by habit. A newspaper clipping. The date visible even from the second row of the audience. Dr. Phil held it. Read it. And for the first time in a career built on knowing exactly what to say, he said nothing at all. Dorothy had called the show's intake line 8 weeks earlier. The producer who took her call had flagged it immediately. 78 years old. Sharp as a blade. Voice completely steady. Said she had something she needed to say on television because she tried every other way and run out of options. When the producer asked what it was about, Dorothy had said, "It's about a boy nobody looked for." And then she'd waited for a response. The producer had called Dr. Phil directly. That didn't happen often. Dorothy arrived at the studio that morning the way people arrive when they've been preparing for something for a very long time. No nerves visible. No small talk in the green room. She'd accepted the coffee, sat in the chair, and looked around at the lights and cameras with the calm of someone who'd already had the hardest conversation they'd ever have in their own living room, and this was just logistics. She wore a blue blouse. Sensible shoes. A canvas bag on her lap that she hadn't let the production assistant take when they'd offered. She'd held it through the makeup chair and the walk to the stage. She was still holding it when she sat across from Dr. Phil and the cameras began to roll. The segment had started as a story about family secrets. That was the framing. An elderly woman with information she'd been carrying for decades. The producers had built a package around themes of truth and reconciliation. Dr. Phil had read the brief in the car. Interesting. Emotional. Good television. He hadn't understood yet what it actually was. Dorothy had answered his first questions carefully. Methodically. She'd grown up in a small town in rural Ohio. Middle of nowhere. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and that was both comfort and trap. She'd been 29 in 1977. Married. 2 kids of her own. Working at the town's only diner. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He'd asked a follow-up question that seemed routine. Something about the family dynamic in the town. And Dorothy had stopped him. Gently but completely. The way you stop someone when you need them to understand the order of things matters. "I need to show you something first," she said. She opened the canvas bag. Reached in with both hands. Brought out the newspaper clipping the way you'd bring out something sacred. Held it for a moment. Then stood up, crossed a few feet between them, and placed it in Dr. Phil's hands. He looked down. The clipping was from the local paper. A small-town weekly, the kind that covered school board meetings and church socials and local sports. The headline was 4 words. 4 words that in 1977 had apparently run on page 3 below a hardware store advertisement and above the weather forecast. 4 words that had been read by maybe 2,000 people on a Tuesday morning and then forgotten. Dr. Phil read them. Then read them again. His expression changed in a way that 30 years of television training couldn't completely contain. Something moved behind his eyes. He looked up at Dorothy. She was already sitting back down. Hands folded. Waiting. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was careful. The voice he used when something required extreme precision. "I saved it," Dorothy said. "The day it ran. I cut it out and I put it in an envelope and I've kept it in the same drawer for 47 years. Why? Because I knew one day I'd need it. I just didn't know when. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to the camera operator nearest him. Cut for a minute, he said quietly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a clear instruction. The camera operator looked at the booth. The producer in the booth hesitated for exactly 2 seconds and then nodded. The studio cameras went to standby. The audience shifted, confused. Dr. Phil looked at Dorothy. Just the two of them now, and the way two people can be alone even in a room full of people when the performance stops. Before we continue, Dr. Phil said, I need you to tell me the whole thing. All of it. What's in the clipping, what you know, and why you've waited 47 years. Dorothy nodded once. And began. In the summer of 1977, a boy had disappeared from Dorothy's town. 7 years old. Dark hair. Quiet kid. The son of a family that had moved there 2 years earlier from somewhere out of state. They weren't well liked. The father drank. The mother was withdrawn. The kids kept to themselves. When the boy stopped appearing, it took 3 days for anyone to officially notice. When someone finally knocked on the family's door, the parents said he'd gone to stay with relatives. The town had accepted this because it was easier than the alternative. The newspaper clipping was the only coverage the disappearance ever received. 14 lines. Page 3. No follow-up. No investigation. No name in the headline. Just a brief, bureaucratic accounting of a child who was no longer where he was supposed to be, written in the passive voice, as if his absence were something that had simply happened rather than something that had been allowed. Dorothy had known, even at 29, that something was wrong. She'd seen the boy at the diner. Knew his order. Strawberry milkshake and a grilled cheese, every Saturday with his grandmother. She'd noticed when he stopped coming. Had asked the grandmother once, carefully, and seen something in the old woman's face that she'd never been able to forget. She tried to say something. To the sheriff, to her husband, to her pastor. Had been told, in different words, the same thing each time. That it wasn't her business. That the family said he was fine. That making accusations without proof was dangerous. That she should focus on her own children and let other people manage theirs. So she'd cut out the clipping. Put it in a drawer. And waited. What happened to the boy? Dr. Phil asked. His voice was completely level, but something underneath it was not. I don't know, Dorothy said. That's why I'm here. Because I'm 78 years old and I'm running out of time to find out. And I can't die without at least trying. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil set the clipping down on the table between them. Carefully. Like evidence. Which is what it was. You've been carrying this for 47 years. He said. Yes. And you've never stopped thinking about him. Not for 1 week. Not in 47 years. Dr. Phil looked at the clipping again. At the 14 lines that had been a child's entire public accounting. At the date. At the name buried in the third paragraph, almost incidental, the way small-town papers sometimes treated the children of families they'd already decided didn't quite belong. He picked up the clipping again. Read the name out loud. Clearly. Into the microphone. The way you say a name when you want witnesses. The audience was absolutely still. His name was Daniel, Dr. Phil said. He was 7 years old. He liked strawberry milkshakes and grilled cheese sandwiches. And in the summer of 1977, he disappeared from a small town in Ohio and nobody looked for him properly. And Dorothy has been the only person keeping his name alive for nearly 5 decades. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil turned to his production team. I want our researchers on this today. Full resources. I want everything there is to find about this case, this family, this town, this boy. He looked at the camera directly. And if anyone watching this knew Daniel, knew that family, knew anything about what happened in that town in the summer of 1977, contact us. Today. The number is on the screen. He turned back to Dorothy. Reached into his jacket. Pulled out a card. But not a business card. Something else. A small, cream-colored card, the kind you find in sympathy arrangements. He'd had one in his pocket since the morning, left over from a funeral he'd attended the previous weekend. He turned it over to the blank side. Wrote something. Slid it across to Dorothy. She read it. Looked up. "You're not alone in this anymore," Dr. Phil said. "You've been the only witness for 47 years. You're not the only one now." Dorothy picked up the card. Held it in both hands. And for the first time since she'd walked into the studio that morning with her canvas bag and her sensible shoes and her 47 years of waiting, she let herself cry. The audience didn't applaud. They sat in the particular silence of people who understand they're witnessing something that matters more than entertainment. Several people were crying quietly. An older woman near the aisle had her hand over her mouth. A younger man 2 rows back was staring at his hands like he was thinking about something far away. Dr. Phil let the silence hold. He'd learned years ago that the instinct to fill silence with words was almost always wrong. Some moments needed air. This was one of them. When Dorothy had collected herself, when the tears had slowed to something manageable, Dr. Phil spoke again. Quietly. "Tell me about the Saturday mornings," he said. "Tell me about the milkshakes." And Dorothy did. For the next 12 minutes, she talked about a 7-year-old boy who'd sat at the counter of her diner every Saturday morning. Who'd always said please and thank you. Who'd had a loose front tooth he kept wiggling with his tongue. Who'd drawn pictures on the paper placemats while he waited for his food and left them on the counter like gifts. Who'd told her once, very seriously, that he was going to be an astronaut. Who'd had a grandmother who'd looked at him like he was the best thing in the world. Dr. Phil listened. Asked small questions when the story needed them. Let the details accumulate into a portrait of a child who had existed completely and specifically, and then been reduced to 14 lines on page 3. The show's researchers found something within 4 hours. The family had moved twice after 1977. The parents were both deceased. But there was a record. A thin one. Incomplete. The kind of record that exists when something happened and people looked away and the official machinery recorded the looking away rather than what it had looked away from. It wasn't answers. But it was a thread. Dr. Phil presented it to Dorothy in a follow-up segment filmed the next day. Gave her the names of a nonprofit that specialized in cold case advocacy. Connected her with a journalist who'd spent 15 years covering similar cases. Gave her the card of a retired detective who'd agreed to look at what existed. It wasn't resolution. Dorothy had been around long enough to know resolution might never come. Daniel might never be fully found. What happened to him might never be completely known. The 14 lines on page 3 might always be the largest official accounting of his existence. But it was movement. After 47 years of stillness, it was movement. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The newspaper clipping was photographed by the show's production team and returned to Dorothy in a new archival sleeve, acid-free, the kind that would preserve it for another 47 years if needed. Dorothy held it at the end of the taping the way she'd held it at the beginning. Like something sacred. Like a responsibility. Dr. Phil walked her to the exit himself. Something he didn't usually do. They stood at the door for a moment, this 78-year-old woman with her canvas bag and this television host who'd spent 30 years listening to the things people carry, and he said something to her that the cameras didn't catch. She nodded. Walked out into the afternoon. The cream-colored card she'd been given stayed in her wallet until the day she died. On it, Dr. Phil had written 4 words, "Daniel was here." Someone remembers. It was enough.